I'm going to start by providing a brief overview of the comprehension strategies. Sometimes in the literature, you're going to see 7 strategies being represented. Sometimes you're going to see 6. Sometimes you're going to see as many as 9. And many of these strategies have different names based on whoever you're talking to. So I'm going to utilize the strategies as they've been articulated by Missoula County Public Schools, in part because it's a fairly common framework that's utilized across our state, and I'll also share with you the other names that we might have for a specific strategy. The first one is the activation of background knowledge. This, of course, is assuming that the child in front of you has background knowledge about that particular topic. So the activation of background knowledge is a critical aspect. In the event that the child does not have background knowledge on the topic that you're teaching or on the topic being addressed by the textbook, this is an area where you're going to have to help them build that background knowledge. So there are some very specific strategies that you might employ. So activating background knowledge or building background knowledge. In the literature, you're going to hear this referred to consistently as activating schema or activating prior knowledge. Both are common terms. The next one is questioning. Teaching students how to pose questions about the text as they read it, and how to look for and locate the answers to the questions that they pose when they come to them as they're reading a text. This is one of the comprehension strategies that's done during reading. So the next comprehension strategy that we want to look at is inference. Teaching students how to infer involves helping them connect their background knowledge to the new information that's being presented in the text. So inference is connecting what you know to new content. It also involves something that we often call in common terminology, reading between the lines. An inference may not be explicitly stated within the text, but may actually be implied by the text. So teaching students how to infer is a critical comprehension strategy. One of the comprehension strategies that we're going to be spending quite a bit of time on during the course of our course is determining importance. We want to teach students how to determine importance, but for us as teachers, we also need to know if we're assigning students to read a 10-page chapter in a given content area textbook. If we were forced to determine which 3 paragraphs are most critical for students to understand, could we do that? Have we already, in advance, determined what's most important to us for students to know and understand and master within that textbook? So determining importance is associated not only with what students do, but for us in our planning process, it's associated with what we need to do as well. So we'll be looking at determining importance. And I'll be teaching you some tips and tricks for being able to support students in determining importance and also annotating text. We need to teach students to visualize. Are they making a mental image of what's happening in the text in their mind? And can they potentially represent what's happening in the text in the form of a drawing or an anchor chart or some other kind of scaffold tool that we might teach them how to use? Visualization is critical for student comprehension, and we need to constantly remind them that good readers actually are playing what's happening in the book as if it is a movie in their head, and they're visualizing everything that the characters within a story are doing, and also various aspects of informational text that are being presented. Because informational text, particularly in the area of science, is rarely presented in the format of a story, you're going to find that visualization processes for scientific content or content that's associated with specific complex concepts may actually need to be presented in a different way. Next, I'd like to talk about synthesis. When we're working with young children and we're asking them to synthesize from a text, we're very frequently asking them to do a fairly simple retell of what the story says. Sophisticated students manage to put this in their own words, and they're doing a form of paraphrasing as they retell the story. Very young children will actually flip through the pages of a picture book and look at the pictures to be able to retell the story. And that's their mechanism or means of being able to synthesize. As students become older, particularly with the 4th through 12th grade students that we're talking about in relation to content area textbooks, we want them to be paraphrasing and summarizing text. And I do this often utilizing a wide variety of tools, including something as simple as a bookmark that is broken down, has a breakdown of the subsections of a chapter, and actually asks students to summarize the takeaway from those small sections of a given chapter. So a summary bookmark is a classic example. Synthesis is very important in order to get content into long-term memory and turn it into new background knowledge that supports students in their reading comprehension overall. And it's exactly what you want if your goal is for them to know the content that's being presented by that textbook. So we'll be talking a little bit about synthesis. I frequently will use group processes, even drama, and other kinds of group discussions like Socratic seminars in order to promote and encourage synthesis on the part of students. Finally, the last one that we're going to talk about is monitoring comprehension. Do students recognize when they no longer understand the text? If they do recognize when they no longer understand the text, do they understand what's causing them the difficulty? And have you taught them a series of strategies for being able to fix up the text, which gets us to our next category of sets of knowns or fix-up strategies that we might use with students. The first strategy I use when something stops making sense is I have to go back and figure out where it stopped making sense, and I have to begin reading from that point in the text. Very frequently, it's because I started thinking about something else, or I was interrupted by something in my environment. And as a consequence, I'm simply no longer paying attention to what the text is saying, in spite of the fact that my eyes are still moving across the words, and the words are presumably still being decoded by me. So rereading, that's a classic example of a fix-up strategy. Looking for context clues, pre-reading or reading ahead in a text, looking at the pictures and the graphics, utilizing a wide variety of decoding strategies, which obviously, if your students are struggling with reading as older readers, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, you've got to go back and you have to reteach those elements of decoding that they may have missed, and you need to be able to support them at a wide variety of levels. Very frequently, however, students struggle because they have a very low level of practice. So I want you to think as an adult reader about the strategies that you use to improve the quality of your own reading, and think about ways that you might directly teach those same strategies to students. Most of us had to come up with these strategies on our own. We want to create an environment for our students where we actually have taught them and have given them the tools to be more successful with content area textbooks.